Thank you very much, Simon. It's so good to be back at CTO Summit. This is an amazing crowd. I've been up in Brisbane and Sydney, much smaller crowds, and I remember coming to the first CTO Summit 6 years ago, and there was 30 people. So the engineering leader community here in Melbourne is really strong. Thanks for coming along. So yes, as Simon said, I'm the Senior Director of what we call Developer Platform of Zendesk. And I started at Zendesk just about 2 years ago. So I'm going to talk about my journey at Zendesk, specifically one of the big things we've done organisationally there over the last couple of years, which is rolling out error budgets. So I'll introduce you to Zendesk. I'm sure there's a lot of customers here today. I'll give you a background of Zendesk and how Melbourne fits into it. And our reliability journey at Zendesk, which is a big part of this talk and the big part of why we rolled out error budgets. A little bit of a 101 around site reliability engineering and error budgets and what they actually mean. Finally, I'll go through how we rolled it out, that process, and then the impacts and lessons we learnt from it and where we think we'll head with this concept at Zendesk. So for context of why this was a challenging rollout and an interesting rollout, Zendesk currently has 900 engineers, and we have 11 engineering offices around the world. Melbourne is the second largest with about 180 engineers, and headquarters is in San Francisco with about 250. So it's very distributed. Any big rollout like this must go through a number of different engineering leaders across a large global spread. We have 500 individual systems and services that make up all the products that run in the background. We have 40,000 transactions per second running through those systems. So our reliability challenges are great. We have 145,000 customers. We're a SaaS. They have certain expectations of our reliability. And we have 150 individual engineering teams. And at the moment, we're roughly growing at about 30%, 30 to 40% revenue a year and 30 to 40% in terms of our engineers a year. So a challenging environment to change something of any nature across the organisation. In terms of our products, we started as a customer support system. You could say a ticketing system. We now like to call ourselves thinking about customer experience, and we have a number of products beyond just Zendesk support, guide, chat, all of the channels that our customers speak to their customers. And in my case, I deal with the platform, which allows developers and customers to extend and embed Zendesk in their systems. So that's the context of who we are. On the surface, what we say to our customers, their experience using Zendesk is a bit like this. It's the zen of being an agent, dealing with customers. You have a nice, beautiful screen. We like to say it's beautifully simple. A lovely coffee, a bit of greenery, and you're calmly dealing with your customers and some of their issues. Behind the scenes for the engineers, it's not so calm, and so we'll talk more about that. So where did we start? What's the reliability journey of Zendesk? A lot of startups started in 2005 when internet SaaS applications were really booming. A lot of them started with Rails, familiar to a lot of people here. And about that time, I think the story goes that the three founders, one wanted to build it in Java, one wanted to build it in .NET, and someone wanted to build it in something else. So the Switzerland was to just use Rails, which was hot at the time. But like a lot of applications that I seem to gravitate towards these days, it's a big monolithic Rails app. It was run by an engineering team, which is often typical of those kind of Rails stories. I don't think there was anyone that was considered someone with infrastructure operations skills hired for about 7 years. So this team made do and scaled the application as its customer base scaled. It was deployed onto Engine Yard. For folks from Envato would know this exact story. Moved to Rackspace, which was a more professional hosting outfit. But bear in mind that the company was growing, even back then, 40, 50% a year. And at some point, it literally could not keep up with its scale. Its particular issue at that point was database contention, and AWS back in about 2012 was not available. And things were blowing up. Things were blowing up left, right, and centre. We didn't have the expertise. So the decision was made, which was probably the right decision at the time, but really a fateful decision from a cultural perspective, in 2012 was to move to a data center. So whilst a lot of companies were moving to the cloud, we were sort of doing the opposite. And really we had to hire expertise to scale MySQL, for example, and a number of other things. And to run a data center, a bunch of engineers that can build Rails apps are not the right sort of people. So we built out an operations team and an infrastructure team and real specialists that took over the reliability and took over running the system. And so that's where we were in 2012. But a couple of years ago, probably in 2017, we realized that these decisions and where we were at as an organization, we had some problems that we really needed to solve. One was we were not moving fast enough. Ordering a new Dell blade was like 6 months wait time. Things to get new servers up and running had tickets in ops queues that were 3 months long, so we weren't iterating fast enough. And one of the biggest issues that we had was reliability and ownership issues. When the site or the product had a reliability issue, there was one large operations team that was on call, and they all jumped in and tried to solve this issue. Any smaller issues went to like a secondary software development team that dealt with them, and the actual product development teams are sort of 2 or 3 chains removed from an existing issue that was happening. So we couldn't pinpoint and focus and incentivize a team to work on an issue that was causing us reliability problems. And when we did have big reliability issues that might bring down our products for a long period of time, and really upset our customers, we had really crude tools to incentivize improving that reliability. For anyone in Zendesk here, this word gives a bit of a shudder down your back, which is what we know as the company-wide production freeze. So over the years, I think prior to 2017, 2016, we'd often have enough outages that were affecting our customers that our CEO would come in and say, I want you to stop work. I want you to down tools. Our customers need a break. They need stability. No more production deploys. And as you can imagine, nobody wanted that, right? And we felt that it was actually creating more reliability issues to do that. But it was a crude tool, and it was difficult for him to target particular teams and particular systems. And so that's what we did. So all 3 of those things around 2017 led us to think as an organization we needed to do things differently. We needed to do a bunch of things differently. And what's been enjoyable for me is we needed to do them all at the same time in the last 2 years, which is about when I started. So 4 things that we've done over the last 18 to 24 months. We moved everything to AWS. So we got out of the data centers. Part of that was changing the culture that we created. We went from the DevOps to the DevOps back to the DevOps culture. And we merged operations and infrastructure back into an overall engineering group. We also decided to put all 150 engineering teams on call. That was a fun exercise. And the 4th piece, which I'm going to talk about today, is we wanted to change the way we thought about reliability and incentivize teams, and we rolled out error budgets. So it's been a big couple of years. What I'm going to talk about, each of those 4 things could be a talk up here, but I'm going to focus on error budgets. So let's recap and talk about site reliability engineering. So I think the site reliability engineering book, written by the folks at Google, who were part of the site reliability engineering team, came out, I think, about 2-3 years ago, so it's still fairly new. And this is a quote from Mark Alvidarez, who wrote chapter 3 of the book. That is his version of site reliability, which I really like. It says, site reliability engineering seeks to balance the risk of unavailability with the goals of rapid innovation and efficient service operation so that users' overall happiness with their features, services, and performance is optimized. So I like that definition for a number of reasons. Is balance. It's not saying we want everything to be available all the time. It's balancing innovation and availability, but it's from the perspective and for the purpose of users, not to balance some internal friction between teams, right? It's focusing on the right balance and the optimized balance for users. So we'll see that theme come through a number of things that affected our teams when we think about it from the user's perspective. So there's One part of site reliability, the site reliability engineering discipline is error budgets. And the two fundamental parts of error budgets are SLIs and SLOs. There's a lot more to site reliability engineering, but we focused on just this part in our rollout. So the definition of an SLI is it's a ratio of two numbers, good events divided by the total number of events. So in this case, the example is homepage requests served in under 100 milliseconds. How many were under 100 milliseconds over the total number of homepage requests? So it's typically a metric, an operator, and a metric value. So that might be something like 99% or so forth. The other part of the error budget concept is the SLO, which is effectively the target range for the SLI over a period of time. So in this case, we want 95% of homepage requests served in under 100 milliseconds over 24 hours. So that is the objective for that system with respect to users, ideally. And then finally, the error budget is effectively the allowable amount of bad events based on that SLO. So it's 1 minus the SLO. So in this case, we allow 5% of failures of that SLI, i.e. homepage requests served in under 100 milliseconds over the last 24 hours. So it's effectively one subtract the SLO. So that's the budget you have to work with. You're allowed to have that amount of failure. So they're the key concepts of the error budget area of the site reliability engineering discipline. So what is the promise of rolling out this concept of error budgets? Why would you do that? Now, if you look at the Google book, they had a very specific reason for doing it, which is slightly different to the reason we had. It was initially designed to surface and make objective the conflict between an SRE team and a product dev team. So in Google, product development teams would build something and they would kind of hand it over to an SRE team to run it. And you can imagine the sort of conflicts you have there when product development teams are making a lot of changes, things are blowing up, the site reliability teams are saying, we're dealing with all this stuff. That was the core for them. They wanted to make objective that conflict or surface that and measure it and have a way to deal with that conflict between the two teams. And the idea was that site reliability and product developers aim to spend that error budget as well at the same time of getting maximum feature velocity, right? So they want to push the envelope of their feature velocity within the error budget that they have. And then if there is an outage, they wanted to turn it around from, hey, we've had an outage to it's an expected thing. And we're okay having an outage because we're innovating and pushing that product and it's within the budget. So it was an occurrence that both development and SRE teams manage rather than fear. So they wanted to change the kind of conversation between SRE teams and product development teams. So in Google, it was really about that potential conflict between SRE teams and engineering teams. What we wanted to do at Zendesk was think about that conflict that can come up between product teams and engineering teams. In our case, this might be a product team that's really pushing the envelope with feature development and an engineering team that's struggling with reliability and doesn't have the right way to talk or the incentives and mechanisms to talk to the product team and change that balance. So we sub in the SRE team in this case and consider the relationship between product and engineering. So that was the promise of the error budget process. So with that, beginning mid-2018, amongst all these other changes, we decided to roll it out globally. And in that, we hired a couple of experts in the field who formed an SRE team, but they weren't an SRE team like Google's team. They were more kind of internal consultants guiding us to these principles, guiding us to how to roll these principles out. And this quote is a really nice quote, but it's specific to Zendesk and our experience of reliability. Error budgets should not tell you when to freeze your feature work. They should tell you which features your customers want you to prioritize working on. So again, it refers to like the Google definition, it refers to your customers. And when I look at that, it's saying that, and we talk about this a lot over the last year at Zendesk, which is feature number one is reliability. It's the trump feature of any other feature we have for any of our products. And so an error budget is kind of a signal to say, your customer is saying they want you to focus on that feature, not those other features. So it's a nice way of taking away from, hey, we're engineers and we need to stabilize our reliability with a bunch of engineering work. We now talk about error budgets as our signal to say, this feature needs a bit more attention. It's always feature number one, but the customer is telling us. So again, it's important that your error budgets are set up as kind of like the de facto voice of the customer. Not every customer is going to send you a ticket, in our case, saying, we're really upset that you were down for 30 minutes last week. The error budgets, the SLOs, are kind of their voice, if you like. And that's the way we try and think about them. So with that definition and with that mindset, we went about trying to roll this out over our 150 teams. And we started in mid-June and what we call SLI'd all the stuff. So teams went away and thought, let's instrument, let's get all of our indicators, as many as we can. And I'll talk a little bit about where we took that a bit too far early on. But the first step was, what are all the things we can instrument that are likely to matter to the customer? The next phase there was SLOs, and this is where it got really interesting and where conversations that I don't think we thought would happen were happening. So SLOs, you're starting to think about, well, what does the customer expect? Do they expect 95% of homepage requests under 3 seconds, under 5 seconds? Is 10 seconds okay? Is 1 second okay? So what was interesting there was the engineers often weren't sure. The product managers weren't sure. We actually weren't sure what the customers expected. So that even just that process of thinking about our SLOs created a lot of really, really interesting conversations. And they're conversations you should probably be having about what your customers expect from a reliability and performance perspective. And that we hadn't in the past, so that really forced some of those conversations. With those SLOs in place, we then rolled out the practical elements of error budgets. So you have a dashboard that tells you over a certain window how much of your error budget has been used. And it's not trivial, the measurement, the bucketing, the maths. There's a whole another talk at SRECon that was done by one of my peers around how you can get that maths wrong and aggregating percentiles and all this sort of stuff. So that took a while to get right. So those dashboards actually meant and were real. And we have to kind of map those over a bunch of different servers and points of delivery and average them. And there's a ton of things just to get that right. So at a point in mid-2019, our Senior Vice President, Head of Engineering said, has everyone done their SLIs, SLOs, error budgets? And everyone's like, yes, we've done it. So that was a big tick. That was a big goal for everyone. We had them in place. But in June 2019, we actually realized we didn't really know what we were going to do when the error budgets were exhausted or depleted or what happened. So in the last sort of 3 months, we've been scrambling to work out what our process is around that. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So that's where we got to a couple of months ago. We call it fully operationalized our error budgets. This is quite hard to do across a global organization. So there was a fair bit of project management involved, a fair bit of stick rather than carrot. Getting this built out, about 260 SLOs across the org, was hard. And you can see where all of a sudden, with a due date, everyone suddenly decided to complete them, which we feel at that point, quite a lot of them weren't meaningful. So there's plenty of those 260 SLOs that are out there that probably aren't as good as they could be. So this is where we are now. We've rolled out SLOs. We've rolled out the error budgets. We have dashboards. And you can see some examples. Obviously, I put a lot of green in here, but in this example, with a 7-day window article page for Guide, has 2 seconds remaining in their budget of the article page being up. Over a 30-day window, they've exceeded their budget. In this case, there's 100%. There's a lot more dashboards. In fact, there's about 260 of them. There's quite a bit of red across them. Some of them should be red, some of them shouldn't be red. But there is a central place for anyone in the organisation in Datadog to go and look at the targets, which are very interesting, and where every single system in Zendesk stands in terms of how much is remaining on their error budget. So in this case, I think the article page up has over 30 days. This is a more recent view. It has 1 minute 35 remaining. So you can go into Amber and the team can start thinking about what they want to do. Do they want to dial down on their deploys? Do they want to focus on reliability at that point as they're approaching the threshold of their error budget? So when we got to mid 2019, we had all these things in place, and unfortunately, 2 of my teams were one of the first teams that happened to have had an incident and an outage once we said we had our error budgets in place. And so I said to the SRE folks here in San Francisco, like, what do we do now? What's the playbook for when our error budgets are whatever you call it? I didn't even know what to call it. And so I kind of led this process, unfortunately, because I had to, led this process of how we're going to talk about this and what do we actually do as a team when our error budgets are exhausted. And the first thing we needed to work out is what do we call it? We came up with the term, this incident has depleted a product's error budget. In Google, they call it an SLO violation, which I think maybe tells you a bit about Google's culture. We didn't quite like the word violate. We had another one which was it's exhausted the error budget, but we didn't kind of want to feel exhausted talking about this stuff. So we came up with the concept of saying we've depleted our error budget. So in the case of the 2 incidents of my teams, they'd both depleted their error budget in one incident. And we thought, well, what do we do at that point? Do we freeze? The word freeze has got a pretty kind of bad connotation across Zendesk, so we wanted to have a different way of thinking about it. We came up with this term, which is the product and or the team, which is generally 1-to-1 or 1-to-2, is in a reliability focus window, and its error budget is depleted. It's a bit soft, nice soft language. But it does, the idea of it is to tell us exactly what we're doing. We're focusing on reliability during this window. And then at the end of a period of time, which is typically a month, 2 sprints, 4 weeks, the error budget is reset. All right? And the idea is that over those 4 weeks, you've focused on reliability, you're resetting, and the signal is dealt with, the signal from the customer is dealt with, and then hopefully your reliability is in a better place. And during those 4 weeks, the process we came up with was rather than freeze any deployments, we were looking for a signal from the product development group that we were pivoting to focusing on reliability. So we had, early on we had these charts to show what percentage of the work are we doing in RSS, which I think stands for reliability and something, I should know. And in this case, this team was focused, just sort of pivoted from focusing its vast majority on that. We know that there's work that still needs to be done or finished or released. We weren't expecting to go to 100% reliability, but we felt the intention was to really say to our customers and to ourselves, this is the focus. The interesting thing was the conversation, formal weekly conversation was product director, engineering director. There was really a very easy discussion. We weren't sort of arguing whether we needed to focus on this stuff. This was a thing we do for 4 weeks. So it gave us, as an engineering group, that space to say, this is what we're doing, right? It gave us that kind of structure to make that priority call. So let's look at the impacts that we think it's had. This is pretty early days, but there's a few things that I've already seen over the last 6 months. It's provided us with a new tool as engineering leaders to communicate about reliability. In the past, our engineering leaders, if there was a big reliability issue, would say, hey everyone, you really need to focus on reliability, please. More nuanced than that, but now we can really drill in and say, hey, we see that this has affected error budgets, we expect teams to be focusing on reliability, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a few different ways we can kind of look at teams and what they're doing now than what we were able to do before. Probably the biggest one that I've noticed is the engineering mindset. And I think Andrew talked a little bit about this around incidents. In the past, if a team system went down, Nothing in Zendesk is, everything is distributed, and every system in Zendesk relies on systems built by other teams, and possibly in Copenhagen or Krakow or somewhere else. So I think there was a mindset which said, hey, my customers' use of this system was impacted, but it was really the edge team that's dealing with Cloudflare. They made a mistake. So what am I going to do about it? Once the first conversation we had, it was like, well, it's your error budget, right? You've got to stop and focus on reliability. And if it's all of them, it was all they're doing, what can you do about that? And it got the mind thinking. It was like, okay, in those cases, maybe I could have been alerted to that a lot quicker. In the case of other systems, a big one that we come up with is circuit breakers. Maybe I could have dealt with an issue in a dependent system. So it really changed the mindset of engineers to thinking not just it's someone else's problem, but it's my problem and I can make a distributed system more resilient. And that led to lots of different architectural changes around reliability and obviously a huge amount of improvement in our observability as well. And this is another really fascinating thing that it's changed. We had one team that had depleted their entire error budget, and they said, look, if we'd only just been alerted to that earlier, we could have saved 30 minutes. And so why are they thinking that? They should be thinking about observability anyway. But the currency now becomes not uptime, it becomes minutes, it becomes time. It becomes time that your customer is impacted. So when you look at like your budget of your wallet, your $100, you go, well, I could easily save 15 minutes if I had an alert there, or if I had something was escalating. So when you flip your mindset to time, you start to think about increasing your mean time to recovery or mean time to detection, rather than just mean time between failure. So we saw that a lot of early warning systems were put in place after error budgets were rolled out. And then the other big one was reliability started to be seen from the customer's perspective. So one unintended consequence was product owners that said, hey, this feature really only needs to be up 95% of the time. We can afford significant issues with it because it's not important to our customers. Engineering teams had realized that they'd gold-plated that application. They'd architected it with more reliability than it was needed. So in a sense, error budgets have become kind of like old school non-functional requirements. If anyone's remember those days when you got a big spec and the last third of it was NFRs, right? So error budgets are NFRs for the modern day engineer. And people started to think, okay, maybe I didn't need to build it with this resiliency. And then finally, it's just a tool for advocating for more reliability work. Rather than saying, hey, I'm really nervous and worried about the reliability or resilience of a system, you can point to indicators, you can point to previous error budget depletion events. So that were the impacts we saw in terms of lessons. Again, there's probably going to be more lessons because we're really only just into this process. But we started bottom up. We built heaps of SLIs that we didn't really need. We sort of pivoted halfway through, focused on just half a dozen SLOs for key product features, and then worked out what SLIs we needed for them. So that would have saved us a bit of time. We forgot about the process, so we had everything in place but didn't know what to do when the error budget was depleted. Another really good lesson that we've found really useful is the first thing in our incident postmortems is where are SLIs and SLOs triggered. So we use that as the feedback loop. If we have an incident, customers have an impact, but the SLIs aren't triggered, then we know it's a good feedback loop to improve them. We probably needed more expertise in the local areas to work through some of the issues of building these dashboards and so forth. We probably needed tooling that would do a lot of the instrumentation for people on our common stacks. And then finally, adoption took quite a while. We didn't know how people were tracking towards rolling these out. So did it work? Again, early days, but I asked my platform teams here in Melbourne, you've all had a few incidents where you've had these reliability windows. How have things changed for you? What have you done? So in my teams, we've had 5 of these events, affected 3 of the teams, and there's been about 50 days of reliability windows that we've had. And one of the big things we've found is what I mentioned before is we've had a lot of near misses. So Lucas, one of the team leads, said there's probably been about 4 incidents that were rolled back within 15 minutes of a deploy, all to do with monitoring that we put in place. Straight through to developers, roll it back, which may not have contacted a developer and cost us hours. So that's worked for them. Another one is our marketplace team who put in circuit breakers that ensured that when the monolith was down, their services were still running. He did an assessment of this a couple of weeks ago and found that possibly 4 hours of degraded or downtime has been reduced from that. Now, we may have done this work anyway. Like maybe we should have. Maybe we should be prioritising it. But we've found the error budget process and the concept gives us a nice space to have that conversation and prioritise that work. So it's been really successful to date with some of my teams. Across all of Zendesk, well, unfortunately, a couple of months ago, we had the return of the dreaded company-wide freeze. So this was an example of where the error budget process has its limitations. We had a service which is console, service discovery, which went down, and everyone was down for a period of time. So what do we do there? Is everyone on an error budget? There's some services that you just can't work around. Maybe you can. So in that case, there was enough impact to our customers that, again, the CEO said, we need to pause here. So we're not out of the woods here. We're seeing some small local changes. But again, company-wide, I think there's more work to do. So the big question will be, is 2020 going to be a freeze-free year? Is winter coming? I'm looking at any of the folks from Zendesk here. They're nodding. The freeze is not coming, hopefully. I'm pretty confident that if I came back next year or maybe the year after, all the little changes that are happening in all the little regions like this, these mindset changes that are brought about by this structural change, will, I hope, come together and ensure that we're in a much better place with our reliability. So thank you for coming and listening to this talk.